Suspension is a key element to an overland vehicle build. It's foundational. Unless you plan to drive a stock vehicle without any weight-altering modifications, your vehicle will quickly become out of spec when it comes to its suspension. Why? Because auto manufacturers have to satisfy the greater community of buyers that will drive their vehicle stock for its entire serviceable life. They also have to meet a crazy amount of legal requirements set forth from the government. But we know that we'll be adding a substantial amount of weight to our vehicle and pushing that weight in even more demanding environments and conditions than the average Joe. So that brings in the need for a better suspension setup for the demands ahead. We have been using Icon Vehicle Dynamics since the start of our major expeditions. We love them and continue to go back to them. So for this vehicle, we're setting it up with an Icon Stage 6 system, modified with an Old Man Emu spring set with 2 additional springs to take the weight that we'll be adding. Suspension is a science and an art combined, and in order to talk intelligently about it, we thought it best to hand it off to Dylan, the lead engineer and partner of Icon Vehicle Dynamics, to help describe what's involved with suspension and the thought process behind it all.
Okay, we're installing a Stage 6 suspension system with a heavy-duty leaf pack, and we're also going to install the optional hydraulic rear bump stop. First, we're going to start with the upper control arm as we do the install, starting at the front and moving to the back of the vehicle. The upper control arm has a couple of features here. It's got a spherical bearing pivot, and it's also adjustability. The reason these things are important is as we're trying to increase the capacity of this truck to meet the requirements for the Overland intended use, we're adding both suspension height, lift, and also wheel travel. To add wheel travel, the stock control arm, although a pretty stout part, only has so much angularity in that ball joint. So we use a spherical bearing to really optimize tire fitment and alignment in a lifted situation. We also put in adjustability into the arm. So the front shock, which is the heart of the suspension system, is a coilover design. It's a 2.5-inch diameter shock body, remote reservoir with a compression adjuster. The compression adjuster gives you the ability to add stiffer compression depending on the driving conditions. What we do is we pre-tune the shock so that setting number 4 is the same as if you didn't have that option. So our standard shock is going to be equivalent to this shock on number 4, which allows you to go both softer and stiffer to whatever suits the conditions. The coilover shock is also ride height adjustable. You adjust the ride height by turning this upper spring collar up and down the shock body, and it puts more tension on the spring and in turn lifts the vehicle. The other thing that we've done in this shock is we've actually changed the extended length of the shock. We are looking for more wheel travel, and because we've already installed the upper control arms, that allows us to put an even longer shock in that gives us additional droop travel. Droop travel is important for the overall handling of the vehicle. If you don't have enough droop travel, you come up to an obstacle or a pothole and the whole vehicle falls into it instead of just the suspension responding to that hole in the ground. When we lift a vehicle, we're doing that at the cost of potential down travel. So that's why it's important when lifted to realize all the potential down travel that you could get out of the suspension. And the Toyota platform is actually really great for us to be able to do that with, because it has good CVs, good geometry, and it allows us to gain quite a bit of performance out of that platform. So the differences between the factory unit and the aftermarket coilover, first off, you'll notice the body diameter. The shock body on this shock is about twice the size of the factory unit, which holds a lot more oil, has a larger piston, and gives us the ability to control the dynamics of the vehicle even better. We also adjust the spring rates. So this spring rate is an increased rate over this factory unit as well. That gives us a better match towards the increased spring rate that we're going to add to the rear, and also pickup trucks inherently have a stiff rear spring, so we're balancing out the suspension by increasing the front spring rate. All right, as we move on to the back of this truck, next we're going to install the hydraulic bump stops and the rear shocks. The hydraulic bump stops are a neat component. When we're talking about handling a lot of extra energy in your suspension, you can only make the shock and the spring so stiff before you get to a point where the ride under normal conditions is adversely affected. But when you're driving aggressively or you're carrying a lot of extra load, you need to address the remaining energy when you do hit the bump stops. The factory bump stop is rubber, and it's got about 1 inch of compliance. So we've got a couple issues here. We've got only 1 inch of travel to absorb a lot of energy, and then rubber returns that energy right away. The hydraulic bump stop has 2.5 inches of travel to absorb that residual energy, and it doesn't return the energy right away. There's oil and nitrogen inside the shock as well as valving, and when it compresses, it returns energy slowly so that the vehicle doesn't lose its composure. Additionally, it's speed sensitive, so the faster you hit it, the more force it's going to generate to help take care of that situation. We're also going to install the rear shocks. The rear shock, compared to our factory one, is a lot beefier component. In addition to the enhanced valving, we also are adding more travel. It's a longer stroke shock. It's got a remote reservoir for heat capacity. It also has a compression adjuster on the reservoir for 10 different settings of compression stiffness. Additionally, the shock has a bump zone in the top of it. The final 2.5 inches of travel is 20% stiffer than the rest of the main part of the travel. And this really helps also when you're engaging the overload portion of your leaf spring, which store more energy and want to recoil faster, and that just makes the whole vehicle more composed. Like all the Icon shocks, this shock is also rebuildable and revalvable, which means it's a lifetime investment. If you damage any component, it's replaceable down the road as well.